The first thing is you see this underscore ID. By default, Mongo is going to create an underscore ID for every single document that you save in the database. By default, you can turn that off. You can make it do whatever you want. But by default, it's going to be an underscore ID, and its value is going to be something that's called an object ID. Who here has heard of an object ID before? Yeah, me neither when I first used Mongo. I was like, what is that? It looks like a string. It looks like a number or a string to me. Like, what is that? Well, object ID is like something from this package called bson, B-S-O-N. If you've never heard of that, that's something Mongo uses, and we can talk about that later. But it's basically an object representation of a unique ID. And that's what Mongo uses for its IDs. And they're very recognizable. I could look at a Mongo ID and like I can tell you that this person used a Mongo database. Like when I see this in the URL, I'm like, they use Mongo, because they're very recognizable. It's not like most databases where there's like a counter and it goes up, right? It's not like that. It's a unique, guaranteed unique ID that's like object-based, and that's what's called an object ID. And that's going to be generated for every single document that you create. So you don't have to worry about figuring out the primary key or the ID of a document. It does it for you. You just create the document and then you get an ID. You're good to go. The next thing to note is obviously the first name, because that's what a student had was a first name. So we got that. And then you get this underscore underscore v0. This you probably almost will never use. And this has to do with like the version of the schema. If you're like versioning schemas, you might be asking yourself like, of course I'm going to version my schemas and I'm going to have this. Most likely you won't use this. I've never had to use this in production. In fact, I always strip this version thing out because the way you would version your schemas is you would, if you do that, you would probably handle the versioning yourself and not allow Mongo to handle it. You would just handle the version yourself with migrations or whatever approach you want to do, so you wouldn't have this thing internally do it and you wouldn't check versions on here. So most likely you would never use this, but it's here. That's why you see that. And by default, that's everything you're going to get for creating a document. If we had more fields, obviously we would see more fields here, but all we have is a first name, and its value is Tim. And that's in the database, yes.
So the Mongo has some validation kernel, that's why it has it. It has some validation that you have to tell it that, oh, as of this version, I'm giving you this data. If you had different versions, they probably give a different set of data for different fields, whatever, right?
Well,
I don't know.
Yes and no. So Mongo itself doesn't have validations, but you can use validations, and we will. But where that happens, it's not on the database level. It happens outside of the database. And then this versioning right here, it's misconceiving. It's not going to allow you to say, save this student with this schema version and save this student with this schema version. It's not going to work that way. That's why I was like, it's kind of pointless, because it's like, what is the point of this? It doesn't really make any sense, because you can't do that. That's just a whole nother schema that you would make. So yeah, this right here is just like, I think this was like part of like Mongo a long time ago when it made sense, but like now it just doesn't really make sense, and they just never got rid of it. Cool. The other thing to take note of is that you can't tell by the log, but this student object is not a regular JavaScript object. It's what we call a Mongo document. There's like a whole bunch of stuff on here that's not logging out. You can't see it because it's not enumerable. When you do a log in JavaScript, the only thing that logs are properties that are enumerable, and the properties that I want to talk to you about are not enumerable. So when I log them, you won't see them. But there's other properties on this because it itself is not a JavaScript object. It's an object from the database that has methods and all different types of things on it that we can use to operate on it. But you won't be able to see it because, like I said, it's not enumerable. Sometimes that's not desirable, and you want to convert that object to JSON. So in later exercises, we'll do that, because if you start doing like matching fields and IDs, those properties can get in the way and kind of like mess things up. And it also slows down the database if you're like passing around these objects in memory, and you really just want to pass around regular JavaScript objects and not document objects. So that's just a quick note. We'll run into this later. Just wanted to talk about it for a little bit. Yes?
So this is a Mongoose document.
Yes. Did I say Mongo? Yeah, Mongoose document. Sorry. Yeah, it's a Mongoose document.
How are they different?
How are they different? Yeah, they're different because, so if you can imagine, you have Mongo right here, right? And then you have Mongoose like sitting on top of it. Mongo by itself just spits out JSON. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. It saves JSON, it spits out JSON. Mongoose sits on top of that and provides like all different types of tools and methods and helpers that virtualizes that to make it easy for you. So The distinction is we call it a Mongoose document because it is, in fact, Mongoose that's taking that JSON from the database and adding all these methods and helpers and properties on it, and then providing it to you so you can operate on it within the confines of Mongoose. Mongo doesn't do that. It's just like, here's JSON. So yeah, it is a Mongoose document because if you didn't use Mongoose, you wouldn't get this. You would just get JSON.